First Minute Capital is a $100 million seed stage fund, sector agnostic, and proudly backed by a number of top technology founders, including 30 unicorn founders. The My First Minute series is about learning from prior generations of successful entrepreneurs and sharing their insights and lessons with the next generation of tech founders. The series has two focuses. One, how they got started in their careers, their first minute, if you will. And two, how they see the world today and what they're most excited about.
My name is Spencer Crawley. I'm a co-founder and general partner at First Minute Capital. And today I'm speaking with Kevin Hartz.
Kevin, I was thinking as I was doing my prep that there can't be many founders who have had, well, your first business got sold in 5 months, so we'll talk about that briefly, but founders who were backed twice by Sequoia and that both times went to IPO, that's got to be a relatively small club. Is there anyone else that comes to mind who's had double Sequoia backing and IPOs?
I can't say offhand. I always joke with Ruloff, who's led both deals, that I had Stockholm syndrome. So loved our captor. No, I kid. Ruloff and the Sequoia team have been amazing partners, and I've been extremely fortunate to have worked with them twice. We signed our term sheet for Eventbrite way back in November of 2009. So Sequoia took a chance with us coming out of one of the worst downturns, and he has been just as active. We've had quite a roller coaster in the past 90 days since this COVID crisis, and he has been as active 10 years later, and the Sequoia team has been as active 10 years later. So I don't pay much kudos to these venture folks. I kid, but they've been a terrific partner twice over.
I've heard you speak publicly before that the reason you started Eventbrite was to bring people together physically and through live experiences, and almost kind of not an anti-gaming or computer screen thing, but bringing connection, physical connection, and experiencing things together was part of the core thesis that you and Julia had. What's this been like the last, and Runa, of course, what's this been like for you the last 2 or 3 months, more on a personal level almost than a professional level?
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. Our mission has and always been to bring people together in real life, IRL, and that was the thesis, and the love and the passion of inkling of the business as we got it started. And it's been something that you would say is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs quite important, is that human belonging, that gathering together, and really in a world, and I will say in a world where we spend more and more time isolated digitally, or able to connect digitally, but I know everyone here has a bit of Zoom fatigue, and live events will continue. So people will continue to come together, and the business, while it's gone through this black swan event, will come back and will be stronger than ever. So I think that all of us have really the straw to come back and reassemble. The United States has been a little bit more ornery in getting out and about, and we hope that doesn't lead to a safety concern. We, of course, want safety to predominate, but in talking to Brian Chesky and Airbnb, it's a very similar story where we just miss that human contact, but not too close of contact.
Kevin, how do you see the next 2 or 3 months? How do you see this easing of lockdown?
Well, I am a big fan of Ben Horowitz, and hopefully many of you have read The Hard Things About the Hard Things and his harrowing experience, during his startup days after Netscape. And his book is extremely engaging. It really tells the roller coaster ride of the ups and downs of a startup and a remarkable recovery. But it really is, compared to what Julia, the CEO of Eventbrite, and her and the executive team there, it's really like Winnie the Pooh or some children's story. Sorry, Ben, compared to what Julia and the team has been through in the last 90 days. So coming into this, we started to get the initial concern. And again, Roelof, I remember a late February board meeting where Roelof and then one of our board members, Jane, Roelof was warning that, this COVID thing would be more impactful. And it was kind of sinking in as, a lot of you had started to have this awareness. We all have this shared experience, but Roelof with his team and experience globally and in Asia, saw this kind of dark cloud coming and warned us. Jane is in the cosmetics business, and she saw, and they do quite a bit of business in Asia, in China, and saw her supply chain interrupted, saw the consumer demand slacken, and then came May 5th. It was abrupt, and our ticket sales, just people gathering, as we saw shelter in place, we saw a dramatic just disappearance of business. It really almost stopped overnight. And that's when the team went into immediate action. And again, it was one of the most harrowing experiences. We did almost $5 billion in gross ticket sales last year. And much of that is our small businesses. We're not ticketing the Wembleys and Royal Albert Halls. We're helping entrepreneurs really that can run their own business, that can host different events around food, around music and so on, come together. And all of that was thwarted right away. So it was really a three-pronged approach of really triaging and helping our small businesses. Renault, as I mentioned before this, worked very hard in providing resources and seeing how we could help. We had endless customer calls on our, what we call our creator side. And then Julia went through a really harsh and biting restructuring where 45% of our company was, people we'd been around for 10 years and more, we had to see depart to right size our business. And then finally that culminated with almost $250 million financing raise. Uh-huh. And really those three elements were key to really saving this business. We of course are not out of the woods yet in terms of, we're seeing some recovery. A lot of the hotel industry and the hospitality industry, Airbnb has seen some comeback. We still see a lot of suppression in the business.
When you and Renault and Julia and the rest of the board think about what Eventbrite might be, how it will be fundamentally different, let's say January 22 or 23 versus before all of this started this year. Does it feel like there's an even greater sense of need and mission for that core reason that you started the company, but also do you see there being really fundamental shifts in how people go to events and is there I'm fascinated by your thoughts on the secondary consequences of what we're seeing with the pandemic.
Spencer, that's a great question, and there are a number of impact points that we've really considered here. One being, simply being when this is when the shelter in place and when we tend to host smaller community gatherings with a lower ticket price. We think those are recovering first ahead of the large stadium and traditional ticketing and entertainment companies. However, there is that return to normalcy, and we don't know the timeline of that. I'm not an epidemiologist, but what we did, and I think this really does apply for all startups, and is that we have a base case. We have what we think is realistic, but is still quite a long recovery period. We have a bull case. We have a case where we see a quicker recovery. And again, that's very conservative in my eyes. And then we have, kind of the bear case that really takes quite a while. It's a W recovery. And so Julie and the team has really modeled this out. And, the secured financing, the OPEX reduction really just ensures that even in this worst scenario, that we come out the other end. So that's one drag against the business. The second is the social anxiety, and we've yet to determine how long that is. It will be, some percentage of the population. We can't say offhand, but on the other hand, we do look historically back as, there are precedents to this, the 1918 Spanish flu, and simply that there was this phenomenon of the Roaring '20s. And so there was this very, I would say, almost hedonistic return. And certainly people wanting to gather together. The arts, jazz was born out of the '20s. And we're very optimistic that we're seeing signs that will be the case in terms of behavior of, or in terms of what we're seeing in terms of anticipation. I'm sure all you are seeing of us ready to get back together when things are safe. And the third is something that I'm personally quite concerned with, is that even though we've had these strong injections of liquidity and the federal actions and the complements over in the United Kingdom and Europe, we're quite concerned about the spending habits of consumers, and consumer discretionary spend makes up for such a strong point. So again, we've kind of factored that in. If we enter into a long recession in the United States, we have, I think, close to 30 million people unemployed. And a lot of that's temporary, but we don't know what's permanent. And so having gone through 2009 and admittedly 2000, don't like to give away my age, we are also prepared for that scenario. And again, the lesson for startups is, I think we all hope for the best. I'm an eternal optimist, and that we'll have a speedier recovery. But I think in the case of a startup, we always hope for hitting a very aggressive plan. But if we see things veering from that, there should always be a plan A and plan B and plan C. And that's been a consistent message that I've practiced and I've spoken to startups I'm involved in over the years.
On the second point of those three drags, the social anxiety, and I really hope we do see that kind of hedonistic resurgence once this is all lifted. What's the equivalent? So for the airline industry, on Thursday, David Bonderman was telling us who's been chairman of Ryanair for 24 years and involved in Continental, as you know, and he was saying, the middle seats, that's just going to have to be a norm. They're going to be free for a certain period for certain airlines. That was at least his view. What's the equivalent for events? How do events look different? There are many different types, and you spoke, that many of your events are around for small entrepreneurs. It's not just the big ones, but how do you see some of those? How do our lives look differently in some of those public forums?
Well, I think there's a lot of, I think the sports teams, the vertically integrated entertainment companies have a direct responsibility. We have a direct responsibility. But in those large stadiums, we know that it was the Bergamo soccer match that really touched things off, where you had side-by-side large crowds. There needs just to be very careful actions that are taken. And those, I have a lot of faith that kind of the humanity will win over the capitalist intention, because even then, I think that if we come back too soon, that's going to be damaging. In the case of Eventbrite, we really serve the local community, nonprofit, the small businesses, the classes, all these areas where social distancing, as they are going to be much easier to implement. We give guidelines, we give practices, we talk about this quite a bit, but at the end of the day, we have a high degree of trust in how our creators will ensure safety in these cases.
When do you imagine full stadiums or full theaters, or is that going to be something next summer? Is it going to be, what's your base case?
Well, again, the lesson for founders is that we can't predict that. And so you really prepare for the worst, whatever, we hear these letters of the alphabet, whether it's a V-shaped, a U-shaped, a W-shaped, or hopefully not an L-shaped. But the responsibility of, founders of the executive team is, and they've really come together tightly at Eventbrite to really drive forward how we see these opportunities. One of the bright spots has been the ingenuity of our creators, and then a lot of the brilliance of Renaud Visage, our third co-founder, who quite a while back.
I see Renaud's name on the thing, so I think Renaud's with us at the moment.
Hi, Renaud. So Renaud had the foresight to see that one of our most popular geographies, addresses, was online, and it's been that way for years. And so Renaud began far before the COVID practice with a really startup, scrappy team of engineers, and built a phenomenal online experience. And as COVID struck, we just saw a very, very pronounced spike in this. And this has been quite exciting to see our creators in their ingenuity in terms of, say we have I believe it's a Brooklyn-based company that gives cheese tasting, and all of a sudden they saw that they could have a much broader reach, and so they mail out cheeses in advance to customers who've signed up and paid on Eventbrite, and then are able to really go through this experience via Xoom integration and others. And then a second example is Daybreaker, where at dawn, it's a combination between dance and is physical fitness, and which was initially constrained geographically, now has become a more global phenomenon with far more signups and registrants than before. So that ingenuity and that using that Eventbrite kind of CRM, the analytics, all that very much applies online as it does offline.
Perhaps very last question on Eventbrite, do you look, would this be easier or harder if you were a private company? Does being a public company bring its own challenges in this kind of period?
Well, Julie and the team and Renaud, and so we really like to kind of fight and to build in the light. And there's concern with, there's a lot of positives to staying private, but as a public company, you really it's almost a kind of Wikipedia experience where you hear and you get to hear from great investors, other founders that are looking at your business, and you get this tremendously terrific feedback, and you have true accountability. There's always the concern, and that must be addressed, of not thinking short term and trying to beat earnings each quarter and so on. But the second piece is you're out in the light, and so we had just a lot of great contrarian thinkers come to us. I think while a lot of people ran towards the very conventional areas, and Eric at Xoom is a phenomenally talented person, and has seen a big burst, and investors have rewarded that. You see a lot of great investors with the foresight that this market will return. This is just a temporary, stoppage, just as we saw in 2001 and 2009. Pete Flint really came out of 2009 in a housing, home sales business much stronger, and flipped because of its efficiency and greatness. And these are the type of patterns you want to look for in your own startups. So coming out stronger, we raised nearly a quarter $250 million from Francisco Partners. In it's mostly a debt instrument, but they're great partners, and they understand, really this great opportunity ahead of them.
I loved that you were both a history major, and that you did a year at Oxford. How did that happen? My undergraduate was the same, so I was curious. How your year at Oxford, I think it was University College, how did that come about?
Right, I was at UNIF, and I think I'd always had a eclectic interest in different areas, the sciences, history, and following university, I felt like I was somewhat of a jack of all trades, master of none, and wanted to focus a bit and study George III, which is a natural precursor for technology, and I kid, but in that sense, I would say what's really applicable is just a high degree of intellectual curiosity, and there's really no other place in industry like that, like technology. Again, I think entrepreneurship is all about learning, about being around brilliant people, and that's where it applies here. History is very interesting because we repeat ourselves in technology on a much more compressed time frame, whether it was 2000, and we spent some time talking to a brilliant operator, Bob Mylod, who was the CFO of Booking.com through the worst of the dot-com crash, and then being struck again with 2001 and going through that period of negative revenue from more refunds than income. And he was very inspirational to Julia and the team in terms of talking through this. So looking back historically, studying these models is absolutely a phenomenal precursor. The tech industry is like a rapidly swinging pendulum from boom to bust. And so understanding, the great periods but also the hardships is quite important.
I've heard you also be critical of some elements of the venture capital industry in terms of, I've heard you hark back to some of the financiers who came from the East Coast and invested in the semiconductor industry, and that, and some of the kind of, you speaking with admiration of some of the early pioneers. But perhaps just before that, just 2 points that you touched on, I wanted to ask you a little more about, one about Stanford and one about your humanities background. With being a history major, how did that shape your thinking to who was a complementary co-founder for you? So obviously, Braverman was your CTO and co-founder at Xoom, and then Renaud, who we have, is CTO at Eventbrite. How did if I can say this, a non-technical background, how did that make you think what the right pairing was for you when you were creating new businesses?
Well, I always had a certain degree of maybe inferiority complex of being around all these brilliant engineers. My first job was was as a product manager around a very engineering-centric business. So I learned Unix as quickly as I could, but also had the experience of being around engineers, working on the product side, and forging those relationships and partnerships, and providing that complementary aspect. So I think the push and pull of a lot of the best, most brilliant companies is that complementary aspect amongst founders and amongst the company. And I think there's no better reflection of that than, say, Eventbrite, or the relationship and camaraderie I had with Alan, and had met him at this technology company, Silicon Graphics, that extended into founding Xoom, the remittance business, in 2001.
That was Jim Clark's business, right?
That was Jim Clark's business. It went through its own, again, the historical manner in me saw, it going through very tough times where it was actually disrupted by the PC platform. They were very high-end graphics workstations, and it was just really hammered by the growth of what was referred to in the 90s as the Wintel, in 2000s as the Wintel, Windows and Intel dominance.
And Jim then brought on Andreessen as a co-founder for Netscape, right?
That's right. And again, you kind of see these talent pools that come together and then kind of explode out into the community, which is another pattern I've noticed quite a bit. Obviously, I had I saw that with PayPal. I had reconnected with Peter Thiel, and I always point out at this point I knew Peter from university as the chair of the Stanford Democrats, and he obviously on the more conservative side, but we always enjoyed great discourse and found him to be a brilliant person, which is too bad in this period of polarization of conservatism and liberalism. This balance of Reid Hoffman, of Peter Thiel, David Sachs, who will be on this show soon, of really Roelof Botha, all with Roelof had an actuary background, Elon Musk.
Same group?
All part of PayPal. In really this cosmic, what would you say, big bang of talent after the quick acquisition by eBay and them all kind of spreading out, Jeremy Stoppelman with Yelp, of course, all kind of exploding out. And we saw SpaceX and Tesla, we saw LinkedIn, we saw Yelp, we saw Eventbrite is my experience in the front row. And sorry for my colleague, Charlie, who is barking in the background.
I think he's just agreeing with you about the caliber of your PayPal friends. But it actually leads perfectly on, Kevin, to a question I was really looking forward to asking you, which is, given how you sold your business to PayPal, all of David and Max and Peter and Elon and Reid personally well. And Keith Raboy I only mentioned because he was at Stanford with you as well, right?
Keith was a big player, and I apologize if I left anyone out, but the talent of the PayPal mafia is so phenomenal and broad-reaching that I can't help but leaving some of these folks off. Javed and Steve Chen coming out and creating YouTube as well. It's just an amazing pedigree, and we could talk at length about how that had happened. I would call the now growing Stripe Mafia is another example of that, where John and Patrick Collison have fostered great talent that we now see starting to come out while still building a brilliant company for the long term.
Well, let's jump into Valley World, and I know that you tend to prefer spending more time with fewer founders, and that you're not necessarily a big sector thesis investor. You believe in people creating new segments and new sectors, and have a kind of a slight hesitation around, let's say, an AI fund or a specific sector focused fund. But just one question on how deal flow works in the top echelons of the Valley. Like when there is a superstar leaving wherever it might be, whether it's Stripe or whether it's Open Door, whether it's I'm just curious, given how interconnected it is, how does word spread that there's someone brilliant and they're starting A or B and you've got to meet him or her? I'm sure there's no magic to it, but I'm just fascinated how the sparks fly.
Well, the kind of spoken notes had been, quite simple, a decade ago, and has now grown into quite a bit of complexity. There's quite a bit of terrific seed funds out there that and angels out there as well that work with these, that see these founders. I think in any case, founders out there listening right now, there's always this concern of well, how do I reach these people? But really, funding should be an adjunct of progress to the business. I think we put the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken, and really focus on financing. And I find that kind of the wrong path. I spoke to a company yesterday that had raised very little money, and that company, I was speaking to them about, and they were considering a round, and against my own best interest, I tried to talk them out of that and actually just continue to build a brilliant product. And so it's really building a brilliant product, focusing on the business, and the money does follow.
And for the many founders listening, are there particular spaces that you're looking for products or solutions in? Are there particular areas you're super excited with your angel hat on?
Well, there's a dichotomy, Spencer, there. On the one hand, I really focus on talent, and some of the mistakes I've been with is to overly focus on a segment or something that I want in the world. So the biggest surprises really, when focusing on talent, great things happen. Whether that's an Airbnb or a Pinterest or so on, is focusing on a founder and seeing new categories exist that one could not even have imagined. There are now the second part of it, there are emerging platforms. So we saw iOS burst on the scene in 2007, and you saw the Ubers and Instagrams and so on form for that. So you can look, and it's a great direction, is to look how the world is changing and what new platforms are emerging. And that also attracts talent. And then you see new great businesses emerge from that. So computer vision, while I don't seek out companies in that space, it is an absolutely emerging platform with autonomous driving, with security, with so many different verticals coming into focus.
Well, so maybe then on the talent front, grit, intellect, vision, what is there a non-obvious trait that you really look for in early stage founders?
Well, I really like to understand the founder's background. It's always been, something that's intriguing to me, is what makes a great founder a founder. I would take Max Levchin as an example of somebody that left the Ukraine. I believe it was during Chernobyl, and really just left with the shirt on his back. His parents had some foresight or had some insights that it leaving that area was of great importance and getting out quickly. So he came to, he moved to Chicago area and began dumpster diving for computer parts, as they say, and building his own computers and then programming. And so it's a combination of that hustle and grit, overcoming obstacles, and then also having absolutely brilliant parents. I believe his mom is a scientist and his father was a musician. And so those sorts of backgrounds are intriguing to me. I find myself falling out of my convention as a middle-class person from a fairly comfortable background. I would say I'm an exception, and again, have some type of chip on my shoulder about that.
Clearly you have a ability to identify really talented entrepreneurs. How do you try to go about understanding them? So their background, I hear you loud and clear, and something, whether it's kind of a cerebral family background, something unusual, chip on your shoulder, an edge. I think that is fascinating. But how do you try to break through the just one-on-one sitting, having a coffee somewhere, or hearing the pitch? Or how do you really dig deep to understand founders when you maybe don't have the benefit of knowing that, I don't know, Reid Hoffman said they were a superstar at LinkedIn? Like what's the process look like of you getting to know a founder?
Well, I love working with first-time founders. I think that, a lot of the more veteran founders can see right through me. But the first-time founder is, of great interest. It's kind of like there's this strange fascination with following celebrity or great, musicians or artists. My passion is seeing, what's that formula that's going to make that breakout band, or where that great artist comes from. And it's very much the same for me in tech. It's trying to pattern match in determining who that is. And Mark Andreessen had said something very intelligently of kind of classifying, there's a Greek, and Spencer, we talked about this the other day, the Greek and the Roman. The Greek is the great philosopher and thinker and architect. The Roman is the road builder, the executor, the operator. And finding that combination, it's very rare in one person. You would say an Elon Musk would certainly fall in that category as thinker, dreamer, but also doer, as an example of that. But usually, people fall in both, and then you look for complementary teams that cover that, or you find those rare individuals that do it both. And so that's just one factor in that equation.
Once you've identified that talent, whether they're Greeks or Romans, and you think of businesses, and there will be many founders on the line who are, later stage founders, the whole concept of blitzscaling that obviously Reid Hoffman's spoken a lot about, and kind of goes a little bit in and out of favor, I think, both in the Valley, but more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you on the growth at all costs versus capital efficiency argument in general, but really at the moment, particularly?
Reid's a brilliant operator. He's a brilliant thinker, and he's, brilliant investor. I have a different philosophy. I like to see companies nurture over time. I like to see them bake. It's been my experience to be able to spend a lot of time with a very scarce resources. So I think ingenuity comes with scarce resources. Eventbrite is going through that now. There's quite a bit of scarcity and just brilliant innovation coming from the team right now. And at the founder stage, a lot of the businesses, most of the businesses I've invested in at the early stage have had this sense of scarcity, that capital, while a brilliant thing to grow a business, can also be a dangerous game where too much capital breeds maybe not the best amount of focus, that maybe doesn't drive as much of a missionary focused team member versus the mercenary that gets the big salary and so on. But most importantly is just oftentimes phenomena in the world take a while to hit their steep S curve, and building and getting that product market fit is quite important. You see that today with companies like a Figma or a Superhuman or a Notion. These companies, were overnight successes that were years and years in the making, with scarcity and a focus on product and building rather than endless fundraising.
I'm going to sneak in a final one, but I won't ask you to elaborate on it. What was your biggest miss ever as an angel?
Oh, it's an extremely long list. I wouldn't know where to start, but YouTube. I spent a lot of time with the Lyft team early on, and kind of felt sorry for him. It was back when it was Zimride, and said, "What is I ended up being involved in Uber in the Series B round, but the kind of list of seeing all these great companies early on. But it's important not to kind of look back, but really to look forward, because otherwise you could torture yourself. I think the other side that's important for founders is really staying engaged. And I'm not saying as much that applies on the investing side, but also it applies on the founder side. I would say my biggest challenges have been maybe not driving through and just having the faith. This is very much what the team at Eventbrite is going through now. It's not, there's still ways to make this one of the greatest comebacks in business history, but it's on its way, and it's from really hunkering down and building. And I see this in startups every day. There's always some sense of concern or this is taking longer than I think, and really sticking with it is great. I'm so happy that Xoom, the remittance business, is a part of PayPal, and it's really thrived, and we've really transformed the landscape for these immigrants sending money back to their families. But to see, a wonderful company like TransferWise that's really stayed independent and just do such great things is inspirational, but also shows a lot of these tech businesses were just getting started when we thought they kind of hit a wall.
And now turning over to Q&A. Robert, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Just wearing the two hats that I do. One, historic royal palaces, which is the Tower of London, Kensington, Hampton Court, Kew Palace, which, by the way, is George III's favourite palace, which you must come and see. Some of the biggest visitor attractions in the UK. That went from revenue of about 100 million to zero in a day, with a cost base of employee costs of about 50 million, zero income. Just imagine for a moment that you're running the Tower of London, which gets 3.5 million visitors a year. 65% of them are foreign. They're not coming back anytime soon. Just let your imagination run riot with the Tower of London and how you would repurpose it. That's point one. The second is my entrepreneur son. It is astonishing what a small world it is. Literally, as we were speaking, I was WhatsApping him, and he was emailing Renault as we spoke, who is coming to speak at his conference next week on the virtual landscape for events, because he founded the biggest event hire business in the UK. And so my question there is, I'm looking at my app for Eventbrite at the moment. I have 20 tickets on it right now, which I can tell you 10 weeks ago I wouldn't have, but I'm doing a lot of events with Intelligence Squared and various other organizations. I'm doing a dinner and a concert with the London Philharmonic on Monday. I wouldn't have done that. I can't believe that human behavior isn't going to change quite a lot, even when we're back into full swing. What do you see as the changes that will have accelerated through this process? I know you've talked a bit about them, but I'd love to hear what you really think is going to happen in this space and how human beings come together to either exchange ideas or meet each other. So you've got the mission for the Tower of London, 3.5 million visitors a year to zero right now, and then the event business. So nothing much.
Well, those are great questions, first off, and always excited to see the heavy use of the Eventbrite app. Thank you again, Renault, for all your stewardship and building a great product. The Tower of London, I think just like the Valley, I always think, I will stop saying the Valley because we've seen this democratization of entrepreneurship all around the world in technology. But just as there is kind of this CRISPR notion of kind of borrowing DNA and seeing, different phenomenon out there, I think that I was just speaking with a board member of a very large museum in Los Angeles, and they've gone through the same thing. And it's really the exchange of ideas amongst the peers that how do you drive more digital experiences, or how do you kind of weather this storm, or how will it change? The best manner I've seen, and perhaps you have as well, is really exchanging ideas and seeing where those bright spots are out in the world. With technology, you see this rapid adoption. You see some unique innovation on the technology side, and that is shared. And it's just like in COVID, this has been perhaps and arguably the biggest experience of people coming together to solve in the world's history of solving a challenge. And similarly with great institutions and historical landmarks and in museums, I hope there's far more collaboration and an exchange of ideas of how to recover this. In terms of the landscape of recovery, again, the near term of the economic suppression, the near term of shelter in place and so on, but it's those long-term effects that, again, I can't predict. I see much more local community, in smaller gatherings is a likely outcome. I still have a notion as we've gone through history that we've seen these recoveries, and that there is this, common or inherent notion for people to gather. And once it's safe, I'm very confident that will happen. But you've seen the future accelerate, and that's exciting for a lot of my colleagues in technology, whether it's Aperva at Instacart that saw, the inevitable happening that groceries and, for example, grocery delivery should happen, and now it's been vaulted rapidly into the future. Or, in fact, the kind of communication here where perhaps we won't get on an airplane and take a costly trip around and have a business meeting for a day and a half and return. So I think a lot of things will change from this notion of technology being accelerated in the future, and against what I thought would happen after this March 5th or after the COVID crisis began. There's been a kind of flight to technology for the first time as a means to rebuild society. That sounds self-serving, but I was quite wrong. I thought that IT spend in a lot of these areas would be hit, and instead we saw a rapid acceleration.
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing is what a number of these institutions are going to do digitally. And in fact, the reason that I got involved with Historic Rail Palaces was the digital opportunity to take these extraordinary things to the world. And I'm sure that's going to be accelerated. It's a lot easier, though, to take a ticket at the door of the Tower of London than to monetize the experience online. But that's another issue.
Well, I think that you just made a phenomenal point that the Tower of London was out of the reach for most of the world, and now there's the opportunity to reach a much more global audience. I'm on the board of the California Academy of Sciences that had released some products in the past. For example, with the science and environmental focus, I released an app called Seek, which uses computer vision to determine the species of an insect or plant or so on. And that has extended the reach of the business all around the world. And these types of innovations are exciting to me.
Igor, coming to you, he's got a great question about Fortnite that I think you will enjoy.
Thank you, Kevin. I have a question, I guess, about future consumption of live events. We obviously saw a recent success with Travis Scott and Fortnite collaboration, and it seems like this is the way Gen Z will be hoping to consume the live events in the future. Do you see this is the way, like, the next generation will actually be consuming things rather than going to a physical location? Or do you think, next generation will still be, going to stadiums or concert halls to see their favorite artists perform?
Certainly, back to the Fortnite example, there'll be a combo of both, but we've seen, throughout history, people coming together in real life to gather. There's nothing else like it that will want to be, with others, and there's something that can't be created digitally here.
Tommy sold his business to Microsoft 2 years ago and is as an investor and a venture partner at First Minute.
My question is, with your investor hat on, do you think that the world of secondaries for startups, both early stage and late stage, is going to become less opaque, more liquid in the future? Do you see that happening through funds entering this space, taking over from brokers? Do you see it through a big platform play that people have tried Be really interested to see what you think about the world of secondaries.
I find it, it's very unrelated to Eventbrite. We serve the creators and we serve small businesses that tend not to be involved in the secondary market. I think there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen there. It really is in an area that hasn't undergone a lot of innovation. It was really an offline, some consumer to consumer, but a lot of brokers involved and a lot of abuses and opaqueness that we've seen in it. And so there is reform that's due in that area. We just hope to see a lot of innovation. Would call to those out there because we don't want to see the market consolidated. We don't want to see that there's this kind of consumer, unfair consumer practices. The best internet businesses, the best businesses out there provide a great offering for consumers and for the merchants and others themselves. So I think over time you'll see that.
Pippa is a great friend who's a partner at Sweet Capital, which is the family office of the King guys of Candy Crush and who sold to Activision.
Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for such a great talk. So I guess just really quickly, one of the things you've touched on is the democratization of tech and venture, and I guess the kind of founder ecosystem outside of the Valley, as you're calling it. Which of those hubs are you interested in particular, either through your investment so far or areas that you believe, both perhaps in Europe or other parts of the US, where you're seeing a lot of talent? One area that we're focusing a lot of time on is Southern California and Los Angeles, where I think we're seeing a really interesting combination of this heritage of media and entertainment, but combined with some exciting engineering talent that's obviously been moving down south from the Valley over the last few years. So just curious, since you often see things ahead of others, which hubs you're most excited about at the moment?
There are hubs, and certainly, London is emerging as one, and there's a kind of selfish interest of investors and founders to be in these kind of growing areas because of the competitive nature of the Valley, the expense of the Valley, the growth of salaries, and to be able to find talent where cost of living is more effective. You'll really see that innovation. It tends to be around great universities, Imperial College, Cambridge, Oxford. I'll mention Cambridge this time, but so you tend to see it around universities. But it's the goal that, and especially as we move more digitally, is that it doesn't have to be tied. And you see so many great innovative companies come out of Europe, Sweden with Spotify, all the great companies that have come out of London. And the trend that we see here is a movement. Los Angeles has been a very great emergent space. We're starting to see this all around the country in the United States, Detroit. We have a large office in Nashville, Tennessee, and some great universities there, Vanderbilt, and so on, that really, I think the university is a feeder for this, and the great universities, but also great talent. Why, restrict yourself to a certain tight geography when in fact, there's 7 billion people worldwide, and brilliance and intellect and innovation will happen more and more everywhere.
Thank you so much. Really, really grateful to you for your time, but also your thoughts on the future, as well as your reflections of some of your founding stories. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, and thank you. It's been a great interaction and really enjoyed it.